My wife came home at 5 a.m. without saying a word, and my silent reaction the next day left her completely stunned. But when I discovered the fireproof envelope hidden in her secret storage unit, I realized her late nights were just the beginning. What I found inside that envelope didn't just destroy our marriage. It revealed a 7-year deception involving a missing child, a cult leader, and an adoption that was never meant to be legal. Some secrets are worth 15 years of lies. Others will send you to federal prison. My name is Dwayne Kruger. I'm 42 years old, and I've been welding steel beams and industrial framework for the better part of 20 years. It's honest work that pays well enough to keep a decent house in suburban Denver and put food on the table. I'm not a fancy man, but I'm reliable. Always have been. Maybe that was the problem. The morning everything changed started like any other. I was up at 4:30 a.m., coffee brewing, work boots laced, ready to head out to the construction site downtown, where we were reinforcing the skeleton of a new office building. Marlene's side of the bed was still cold, which had become normal over the past few months. She'd been pulling these marathon sessions at Henderson & Associates, or so she claimed. I was halfway through my first cup when I heard her car in the driveway. The engine shut off with that familiar tick of cooling metal. Then nothing. No footsteps on the gravel, no jingle of keys. Just silence that stretched on long enough to make me walk to the kitchen window. There she sat in her Honda, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead like she was trying to solve some impossible puzzle. Her blouse was wrinkled, her hair looked like she'd been running her fingers through it all night, and there was something about her posture that made my chest tighten. When she finally came through the front door, it was 5:02 a.m. according to the microwave clock. She kicked off her heels without looking at me, dropped her purse on the counter, and headed straight for the stairs. Long night. I called out, keeping my voice casual. She paused on the third step, her hand on the banister. For a moment, I thought she might turn around, might give me some explanation that would make sense of the growing distance between us. Instead, she said, "I need a shower," and disappeared upstairs. No good morning. No sorry I'm late. No acknowledgement that I'd been sitting there waiting, wondering if something had happened to her. Just the sound of running water and the bathroom door locking. I finished my coffee in the quiet house, grabbed my lunch and hard hat, and headed out to work. But something had shifted. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the defensive set of her shoulders, the fact that she was coming home at dawn instead of midnight. A man doesn't spend 2 decades reading blueprints and structural stress points without learning to recognize when something's about to give way. That evening, when I got home covered in metal dust and sweat, Marlene was already in bed. Said she had a headache. Said the project was killing her. Said a lot of things that felt like thin ice over deep water. I stood in that doorway, watching her pretend to sleep, and realized I was looking at a stranger wearing my wife's face. The next few days, I did something that completely threw Marlene off her game. I stopped asking questions. Didn't mention the 5 a.m. arrival. Didn't bring up the overtime that seemed to happen every other night. Didn't even comment when she started taking phone calls in the garage, claiming it was work stuff that required privacy. Instead, I just watched, and my silence left her completely stunned. See, Marlene was used to me being the concerned husband, the guy who'd ask, "How was your day?" and actually listen to the answer, who'd worry when she was late and call to make sure she was okay. For 15 years, I've been her safety net, always ready with questions that gave her opportunities to explain away anything suspicious. But now, nothing. I'd come home from the construction site, grab a beer, and settle into my recliner with the evening news. When she'd walk in at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., I'd look up, nod, and go back to my program. No interrogation, no hurt feelings, just acknowledgement that she existed and nothing more. It was driving her crazy. "You're quiet tonight," she said on Thursday, standing in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, still in her work clothes at 10:30 p.m. I looked at her. "Am I?" "Yeah. Usually you ask about my day." I shrugged, took a sip of my beer. "Figured if you wanted to tell me, you would." She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head. This wasn't the script she was used to. The concerned, slightly jealous husband had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely indifferent to her comings and goings. "The Morrison account is really demanding," she said, testing the waters. "Lots of late meetings." I didn't look away from the television. "It should wrap up soon." "Okay. 5 minutes of silence stretched between us before she disappeared upstairs. I heard the shower running, then the bedroom door closing with more force than necessary. What Marlene didn't know was that I'd started making some calls of my own. Henderson and Associates was a real company, all right. But when I asked the receptionist about overtime schedules and project deadlines, pretending to be a husband trying to plan a surprise dinner, the woman seemed confused. "We encourage work-life balance here," she'd said. "Most of our staff are home by 6. I also drove by the office building twice after normal business hours. Dark windows, empty parking lot, no marathon work sessions happening there. But I kept this information to myself. Let Marlene think her stories were landing. Let her get comfortable with the lies while I gathered facts. Because I'd learned something important in my line of work. Before you start cutting steel, you measure twice. And before you confront a cheating wife, you better have your evidence lined up solid." Friday night. She came home at 11:45 p.m., and I was still in my chair, reading a welding manual. "Dwayne, we need to talk." I looked up, marked my page. "About what?" "About us. About how distant you've been." And that's when I knew she was getting desperate. When a cheater starts complaining about distance, it usually means they're worried their cover story is falling apart. "About us. About how distant you've been." I set my welding manual on the coffee table and gave Marlene my full attention for the first time in days. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her wedding ring in a way that made my stomach tighten. "Distant," I said. "That's interesting coming from someone who's been working 12-hour days for the past month." She sat down on the edge of the couch, maintaining careful distance between us. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. You used to care when I had to work late. You bring me dinner at the office, or at least call to check on me." I almost laughed. "You want me to bring dinner to Henderson and Associates? I think your coworkers might find that strange, considering they all go home by 6. The color drained from her face. "What do you mean?" "I called them. Asked about your overtime schedule. Funny thing is, they don't seem to have one." Marlene stood up quickly, pacing to the window. "You checked up on me? That's controlling, Dwayne." "No, that's being a concerned husband. What you've been doing is lying." She spun around, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a real emotion in her eyes. "Fear. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Sometimes I just need space to think, to process." "What do you go to think, Marlene?" "Because it's not the office." "That's not. I can't do this right now." She headed for the stairs. "I'm exhausted." "I bet you are," I said quietly. She stopped halfway up the steps. "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd married had never been a coward. She might have been stubborn, might have had a temper, but she never ran from a fight. This person trying to escape upstairs was someone else entirely. "It means I'm tired of playing games, Marlene. You want to talk about distance? You've been a ghost in this house for months. So either tell me what's really going on, or don't. But stop insulting my intelligence with stories about overtime that doesn't exist." She stared at me for a long moment, her hand gripping the banister, so tight her knuckles were white. Then she said the words that confirmed what I already knew. "I think we should take a break." "A break from what?" "From us. From this house. I need time to figure things out." I nodded slowly. "How much time?" "I don't know. A few weeks, maybe longer." "And where will you be doing this figuring?" "I'll stay at my sister's place." Another lie. Her sister lived in Phoenix, and they barely spoke. But I didn't call her on it. Instead, I stood up, walked to the front closet, and pulled out her suitcase. "Here," I said, setting at the bottom of the stairs. "Don't let me keep you." The look on her face was priceless. She'd expected me to beg, to fight for our marriage, to make this difficult for her. Instead, I was holding the door open. "Dwayne, pack your things, Marlene. Take all the time you need." After Marlene left that night with 2 suitcases and a confused expression, I did what any good welder would do when faced with a structural failure. I examined the foundation to see how deep the damage went. Her laptop was still on the kitchen counter. She'd left in such a hurry that she forgot to take it. A mistake that would cost her dearly. I spent the weekend going through files, browser history she thought she deleted, and email accounts I didn't even know she had. What I found made my 15-year marriage look like a practice run for someone else's real life. There were hotel reservations dating back 8 months. Always the same pattern. Business trips that Henderson and Associates had no record of, overnight stays in cities where she supposedly had clients. But the names on the reservations weren't hers. They were under the name Marlene Davidson. Her maiden name. She'd been living a double life, complete with fake identity and separate credit cards. The emails told the whole story. She wasn't just having an affair. She was planning an entirely new existence. The emails told the whole story. She wasn't just having an affair. She was planning an entirely new existence with someone from her spiritual group. But that wasn't the worst part. Hidden in a folder labeled insurance documents was a custody agreement draft. Not for any child I knew about. For a 7-year-old girl named Isabel Davidson. The dates didn't make sense at first. 7 years ago, we were still together, still trying to have kids of our own. Marlene had gone through a phase where she was distant, claiming work stress. She'd even taken a month-long business trip to Seattle, said the company was expanding and needed her to set up the new office. I sat in my kitchen, staring at that custody document, and realized that the month in Seattle hadn't been about business expansion. It had been about hiding a pregnancy. My wife hadn't just been cheating on me for the past year. She'd been lying about having a child for the past 7 years. I picked up my phone and called the one person who might have answers. Marlene's mother, Patricia. Dwayne, is everything all right? It's pretty late. Patricia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. 7 years ago, when Marlene was in Seattle for that extended business trip, what really happened? Long silence. Then a sigh that told me everything I needed to know. She made me promise never to tell you. Well, I'm asking you to break that promise. She was pregnant, Dwayne. She gave birth to a little girl and placed her with an adoption agency. She said the timing wasn't right, that you two weren't ready for children. I closed my eyes. Whose child was it, Patricia? I don't know. She wouldn't say. Just that it was a mistake she couldn't undo. After I hung up, I sat in my empty house and tried to process the magnitude of what Marlene had hidden from me. Not just an affair. Not just lies about working late. She'd carried another man's child, given birth in secret, and arranged an adoption without ever telling me she'd been pregnant. Tomorrow, I was going to find that little girl, because something told me this story was far from over. The adoption agency in Denver was my first stop Monday morning. I'd taken the week off work, telling my foreman I had family business to handle. Wasn't technically a lie. I'm looking for information about a child placed through your agency 7 years ago, I told the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. Are you the birth father? I might be. My wife arranged the adoption without telling me she was pregnant. The receptionist's expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine concern. That's unusual. Let me get Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson was the agency director, a no-nonsense woman who'd probably seen every family crisis imaginable. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes. Mr. Kruger, I need to be direct with you. If you're not listed as the birth father on the original documents, I can't share specific information about the placement. What if the birth mother lied about paternity? That would be a legal matter requiring DNA testing and court orders. However, I can tell you that the child you're asking about was placed with a family here in Denver. Good people who've been waiting years for a daughter. My stomach lurched. Was there anything unusual about the placement? Any red flags? Mrs. Henderson hesitated. The birth mother was very specific about wanting a family with particular beliefs. She was quite insistent that the adoptive parents share her spiritual values. What kind of spiritual values? I'm not comfortable discussing details, but let's say they weren't mainstream Christian beliefs. I left the agency with an address across town and a growing sense of dread. The drive took 30 minutes, most of it spent wondering what I'd find when I got there. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, well-maintained, but unremarkable. I parked across the street and watched for 20 minutes before I saw her. A girl, maybe 7 years old, playing in the backyard. Dark hair like Marlene's, but something about her facial structure reminded me of someone else. Someone I couldn't quite place. I was about to leave when the front door opened. A woman emerged, calling the girl inside for lunch. She wore flowing clothes and had multiple crystals hanging around her neck. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the symbol painted on their mailbox. The same geometric pattern I'd seen on pamphlets in Marlene's laptop files. The same symbol that appeared on business cards for something called the Sacred Circle. This wasn't just any adoption. Marlene had specifically placed her daughter with people who belonged to whatever group she was involved with. The little girl wasn't just hidden from me. She was being raised by a cult. I spent the rest of the day researching the Sacred Circle. What I found made my hands shake as I scrolled through web page after web page of testimonials, recruitment materials, and barely concealed propaganda. They called themselves a spiritual community dedicated to raising children free from societal programming. They believed traditional family structures were toxic, that children should be raised collectively by enlightened guardians rather than biological parents. They had compounds in 3 states: Colorado, Montana, and Oregon. Members were encouraged to sever ties with non-believers, including family members who might interfere with spiritual growth. The most disturbing part was their adoption program. They specifically targeted pregnant women in crisis situations, offering support and guidance through traditional agencies while funneling children into their community. Marlene hadn't just hidden a pregnancy from me. She'd given our potential daughter to a cult that specialized in stealing children from their biological families. I called Patricia again. This time, I wasn't asking politely. I need to know everything, Patricia, about the sacred circle, about Marlene's involvement, about why she gave that child to those people. Long pause. She said they were good people who would raise the child properly. Did you know they're a cult? A what? Religious extremists who cut children off from their biological families. Did Marlene tell you that part? No. She said they were spiritual people who valued community. She thought it was better than raising the child alone. She wouldn't have been alone. She had me. But it wasn't your child, Dwayne. The words hit like a physical blow. How do you know that? Another pause. Because she told me who the father was. Someone she met during a difficult time in your marriage. Someone who shared her new beliefs. What's his name, Patricia? I can't tell you that. You can and you will, because I'm going to find out anyway. The only question is whether you help me or I dig it up myself. She sighed heavily. Marcus Caldwell. He's some kind of leader in their group. Marlene said he helped her understand her true purpose. I wrote down the name, my hand steady despite the rage building in my chest. Marcus Caldwell, the man who'd fathered a child with my wife and convinced her to give that child to his cult. Is she still in contact with him? I don't know. She doesn't tell me much anymore. After I hung up, I sat in my truck outside their house and watched that little girl play in the backyard. She had no idea that her biological father was a cult leader and her mother was a liar. She had no idea that somewhere in Colorado, a man who might have been her stepfather was trying to figure out how to protect her from the very people who'd raised her. But I was going to find Marcus Caldwell. And when I did, he was going to answer for what he'd done to my family. Finding Marcus Caldwell took 3 days of digging through public records and Sacred Circle materials. He owned property outside Denver under a business name, Mountain Spirit Retreats. The address led me to a sprawling compound nestled in the foothills, complete with multiple buildings and enough land to house dozens of people. I didn't go in with guns blazing. That's not how you handle a man who's built his life on manipulating others. Instead, I called his business line and scheduled a consultation about spiritual guidance during a difficult life transition. The man who greeted me at the gate looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a cult leader. Long gray hair, expensive casual clothes, eyes that seemed to look right through you. He radiated the kind of confidence that comes from having people hang on your every word. "Welcome, Dwayne," he said, extending his hand. "I understand you're going through some challenges in your marriage." I shook his hand, applying just enough pressure to let him know I wasn't some broken man looking for easy answers. You could say that. He led me to a meditation room filled with crystals, burning incense, and carefully arranged cushions. Everything designed to make visitors feel like they were entering sacred space. "Tell me about your wife," he said, settling into a cross-legged position that probably took years to perfect. "Her name is Marlene. Maybe you know her." His expression didn't change, but I caught a slight tightening around his eyes. "I meet many people seeking guidance. The name sounds familiar. She had your child 7 years ago. Gave her to a family in Boulder who happens to worship the same spiritual teachings you peddle." Now his mask slipped completely. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. You seduced my wife at one of your retreats, convinced her to carry your child in secret, then arranged for that child to be raised by your followers. The only thing I'm not clear on is whether this was calculated from the beginning or just a happy accident." Marcus stood up slowly, his peaceful guru act replaced by something much colder. "Mr. Kruger, I think you should leave." "I'm not done talking." I remained seated, forcing him to look down at me. "See, I've been doing some research on your organization. Turns out the IRS is very interested in religious groups that don't file proper paperwork. And Child Protective Services gets concerned when they hear about children being placed through unofficial channels. You're threatening me. I'm informing you. Tomorrow morning, I'm driving to Boulder to introduce myself to Isabel. Her adoptive parents are going to learn some interesting facts about her biological father and the organization they've been supporting. Marcus sat back down, his composure cracking. What do you want? I want my wife to stay away from your group. I want that little girl to grow up knowing the truth about where she came from. And I want you to understand that if you or any of your people contact Marlene again, I'll make sure every law enforcement agency in 3 states knows exactly how your adoption program works. Marlene came to us voluntarily. She believed in our mission. Marlene was vulnerable, and you exploited her. That stops now. I stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back. One more thing. If I find out you've placed other children through similar arrangements, I'll burn your whole operation to the ground. His peaceful mask was completely gone now. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. Try me. The next morning, I drove across town with a folder full of documents and a plan that would either save a little girl or land me in jail. Sometimes doing the right thing requires taking risks. The adoptive parents, Robert and Susan Winters, were exactly what Marcus had ordered. Well-meaning people who genuinely believed they were part of something spiritually significant. When I showed up at their door with proof of their connection to the sacred circle, their world collapsed. We had no idea it was a cult, Susan said, tears streaming down her face as she looked through the evidence I compiled. They told us it was a progressive spiritual community. Where's Isabel now? I asked. School, Robert said. She'll be home in an hour. I spent that hour explaining everything I'd learned about Marcus, the sacred circle's real agenda, and Isabel's true parentage. By the time the little girl walked through the front door, her adoptive parents had made a decision that took real courage. Honey, Susan said, kneeling down to Isabel's level, this is Mr. Kruger. He has some things to tell you about your birth family. Isabel looked at me with curious dark eyes. Are you my real daddy? The question hit like a punch to the stomach. No, sweetheart, but I was married to your birth mother. I would have loved to be your stepfather if I'd known about you. For the next 2 hours, we talked. I showed her pictures of Marlene from before she joined the cult, told her stories about the woman her mother used to be. Isabel was smart, asking questions that proved she'd been wondering about her origins for a while. Why didn't she keep me? Isabel asked. Because some bad people convinced her it was better this way. But that doesn't mean she didn't love you. Robert and Susan had already called a lawyer. They wanted to know their options for protecting Isabel from the sacred circle's influence, for ensuring the little girl could make her own choices about religion and spirituality when she was old enough. We love her like our own daughter, Susan said, but she deserves to know the truth. Will you keep her safe from Marcus and his people? Absolutely. We're prepared to move if necessary. I left their house knowing that Isabel was in good hands. But my work wasn't finished. I still had to deal with Marlene and make sure she understood the consequences of her choices. That evening, I called her sister's number in Phoenix. Marlene answered on the second ring. I found her, I said without preamble. Long silence. Found who? Isabel. Your daughter. The one you gave to Marcus Caldwell's cult followers. Dwayne, how did you? I also met Marcus. Interesting guy. Very interested in maintaining his tax-exempt status and staying out of jail. You don't understand what you're interfering with. I understand that you gave your child to people who cut kids off from their biological families. I understand that you've been lying to me for 7 years about one of the most important things that ever happened in your life. It was complicated. It was selfish. But here's what's going to happen now. You're going to stay away from the sacred circle. You're going to get real therapy from a licensed professional, not spiritual guidance from a con artist. And if you ever want a relationship with that little girl, you're going to earn it the hard way. Or what? Or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of mother abandons her child to a cult. 3 weeks after my meeting with Marcus, Marlene called. Not from Phoenix, where she was supposed to be staying with her sister, but from a number I didn't recognize. We need to talk, she said without preamble. About what? Your cult leader boyfriend? Your secret daughter? Or maybe the 7 years of lies? About how you destroyed everything I was trying to build. I'll meet you at Murphy's Diner on Colfax. 1 hour. Come alone. She was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Gone was the polished accountant I'd married. This woman looked hollow, defeated. Marcus said you threatened him, she said as I sat down. I informed him of the legal consequences of his actions. Big difference. You don't understand what the sacred circle means to people like us. People like us? I never joined a cult, Marlene. I never gave away a child to religious fanatics. She flinched. They're not fanatics. They're people who found a better way to live. A better way that involves lying to your husband for 7 years and abandoning your daughter to strangers. I didn't abandon her. I placed her with a loving family who share my values. I pulled out my phone and showed her photos from my recent visit to Boulder. You mean Robert and Susan? The people who had no idea they were part of a cult until I showed them the evidence? They're horrified, Marlene. They're considering relocating to protect Isabel from your so-called spiritual community. The color drained from her face. You had no right to interfere. I had every right. That little girl is part of my family, whether you acknowledge it or not. She's not your daughter. No, but she could have been my stepdaughter if you've been honest. Instead, you chose to let Marcus manipulate you into giving her away. Marlene stood up abruptly. I'm done with this conversation. Sit down. We're not finished. Something in my voice made her obey. For the first time in our relationship, she was taking orders instead of giving them. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to get real therapy from a licensed professional, not spiritual guidance from Marcus. Real help for whatever made you think lying was acceptable. And if I refuse, then I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person abandons their child to a cult. Your family, your co-workers, everyone. She stared at me with something approaching hatred. You've changed, Dwayne. No, I've just stopped pretending your lies were acceptable. There's a difference. What about us? Our marriage. I looked at this woman who'd shared my bed for 15 years while living a completely different life in secret. There is no us, Marlene. There never was. Just me, and whatever character you were playing at the time. She left without another word. I finished my coffee alone, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. 6 months later, I was installing support beams in a new hospital when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a Boulder number I recognized. Mr. Kruger? This is Susan Winters. I hope you don't mind me calling. Not at all. How's Isabel? She's doing wonderfully. We moved to Oregon, just to be safe. She's thriving in her new school. Good. And the Sacred Circle? Disbanded. The IRS revoked their tax-exempt status, and several members were arrested for fraud. Marcus Caldwell is facing federal charges. I felt a deep satisfaction at that news. What about Marlene? She's been trying to contact us through lawyers, demanding visitation rights. We wanted to ask your opinion. I thought about the little girl I'd met briefly, smart and curious despite being raised by cult members. What does Isabel want? She's asked about her birth mother, but she's also afraid. The therapist says she needs time to process everything that happened. Then give her time. Don't let anyone pressure her into relationships she's not ready for. That's what we thought. Thank you for everything you did, Mr. Kruger. If you hadn't intervened, you would have figured it out eventually. You're good people. After I hung up, I went back to work. The hospital was going to save lives when it opened, and I was proud to be part of building something that mattered. That evening, I had dinner with Patricia, Marlene's mother. She'd been devastated to learn the truth about her daughter's choices, but grateful that someone had tried to protect her granddaughter. Any word from Marlene? I asked. She's living in California now. Says she's found a new spiritual teacher. Some people never learn. She lost everything that mattered, Dwayne. Her marriage, her daughter, her family's respect. That has to count for something. I nodded, but I wasn't sure it did. Consequences only matter if you learn from them. A year later, I remarried. Linda was a trauma nurse who understood that good relationships require honesty, communication, and mutual respect. No secrets, no lies, no hidden agendas. Sometimes I still think about Isabel, hope she's growing up strong and independent. But I don't regret the choices I made. When someone you love betrays you that completely, walking away isn't giving up. It's finally standing up for yourself.